And this recording will be available as soon as I get it. We'll post it on our website on adfontesmedia.com under a section for educators that says more educator materials. It's not the most descriptive thing, but all right. Cool. I'm really excited to talk about this subject today, and from the response I got online, it sounds like a lot of you are as well. So this is the folks who are on this webinar today are really interested in the topic of conspiracy theories and misinformation, disinformation, how it spreads, how to combat it. So there's a little bit of preaching to the choir here. It's not people who I'm not sure. There might be folks on here that really have a genuine interest and have been maybe accused of spreading conspiracy theories and want to engage in an earnest discussion about that as well. So in any event, I'm excited for you to join me. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And if you, again, if you can't see my screen share for some reason, then just holler at me, but I will try my best to answer questions at the end. I'm going to fly through this information. One of the things I tend to do is have just a ton of content, and more content than I can actually cover in an hour. But I don't want to make these meetings, an hour and a half or 2 hours or whatnot. So I'm just going to pack in as much information in there. I'm going to try to leave 10 to 15 minutes at the end for questions. I want to go through examples. All right. Just want to make sure I can see my little chat box here and see you guys all there. All right. And I want to make sure that you all can see the PDF, the first slide there says how to spot conspiracy theories. And we could just type in yes in the chat. Perfect. All right, let's dive right in. So you may have seen the graphic on Facebook and Twitter recently. That was a graphic that I made in 2017. After I made the slides will be available afterwards. The graphic itself will, I made it in 2017 after I made the first version of the media bias chart, but before Adfontes Media was a company. And I just thought it was useful to look at a bunch of different conspiracy theories I saw at the time floating around the internet, and taking actual quotes that I would see in these in these articles and or Facebook posts or what have you, and deconstruct why it was common to see those in there, and why people were sharing them, and and what the logical fallacies were in those. So this is entitled Practical Strategies for Identifying and Combating the Internet's Most Outlandish Yet Appealing Content. The appeal is really important. That's why this stuff spreads. So here's our overall agenda for today. We're going to talk about overall concepts and principles of dealing with conspiracy theories and misinformation. We're going to actually go over not just 6 red flags, there are 10 red flags. So you get bonus extra 4 red flags. As we engage in discussion online, people pointed out additional common tropes and rhetorical patterns that exist in conspiracy theories. And so I added a few of them to address them here. We're going to actually spend some time diving into a good example of a current modern conspiracy theory, because it's most fun to go straight through examples. And then strategies for combating them. So I don't want to leave you frustrated. It's always my goal to give you some hope and show you that things can be done about these problems that seem overwhelming. So we'll spend time going to that. And brief pitch, that's what I'm going to do right now. As you know, this webinar is free, and I want to make this webinar free. This information is really important to get out there, and especially during this time, I don't want money to be a limiting factor for folks, in charge for access to this kind of content. So we're making it available for free on our website afterwards as well. But as you know, Adfontes Media, we're a startup. We're a very small company. We sell our products and services like our licenses, memberships, our CART educator platform, and we use that money to reinvest in our ability to rate more news sources on an ongoing basis. We have, our public mission is to make news consumers better and make news consumers smarter and make the news media better. And that's a really big mission. And in order to fulfill on that, we do need some funding. So we ask that if you can become a member and support us, that you do. And like I said, this pitch is brief, so now it's over. All right, thanks for bearing with me through that. Let's go over the general concepts, overall concepts and principles. If you were on the last website, last webinar, I talked about how to tell what's true in the news and discussed a concept called probabilistic thinking. So we'll go over that briefly in a second, but we're going to talk about understanding the nature of distrust and why people distrust things, understanding the appeal of what we're commonly referring to here as conspiracy theories or misinformation or disinformation. You'll see me refer to it as multiple things here. And then the most important overall concept and principles when it comes to combating this type of information is be kind and be effective. All right. So going back to probabilistic thinking, this concept is one of my favorite concepts, and it's addressed really effectively in a book called Thinking in Bets by Annie Duke. She has an organization that she's a part of called the Alliance for Decision Education, and it's all about making good decisions when you don't have all the facts. So we have to accept that in this very complex world, we as individuals cannot possibly know everything. There's lots of stuff that we don't know, but we still have to go around making decisions about what's more likely to be true than not, and acting according to those good bets. Like we want to bet more often on what's more likely to be right than what's less likely to be right. So instead of thinking in terms of right or wrong and true and false and these absolutes and these binaries, everything that we do at Advantage Media is about getting as specific and granular as possible. And that involves avoiding generalizations. It involves avoiding absolutes and avoiding, the temptation to always feel that you're right. We are often wrong. So it's really important to be humble about the fact that you can be wrong about something. So it's important to leave room for doubt, so that when you do change your mind or when you update your beliefs based on new information, you're more willing to do that. So there are, if you think about it as a range of certainty, think of like truth or veracity or the likelihood of a conspiracy theory being true or not true on this scale of certainty. There are certain things that you can know with pretty much 100% certainty, but that's a very small universe of things. These are things that you experience just yourself, and you can witness yourself. Like, it is raining on me right now. Like, you can be very certain about that. A lot of things that you're quite certain about, you can be, almost certain, like 95% probability. Those are things that you just accept them as true, even though you don't necessarily know that they're true from your own personal experience. A lot of the information, especially the information on the internet that we can't know firsthand, that we have to rely on the news ecosystem to be informed about, lies in the scale of probability. So the stuff that's most likely to be true, stuff that we call probable, let's assign that between like a 60% and 80% probability. And then there's the stuff that you're not really sure if it's true, but it's more likely than not that it is. So let's just say above 50%. Then you get down to things that are there's 0% true. There's no likelihood ever that it could be true at all. Like, it's impossible. Now, just like things that are very, very certain, there are very few things that fall into this impossibility range because there's so many things that we don't know. So even save yourself some potential future embarrassment, or and allow yourself some humility to not ever say that something is totally impossible and 100% wrong, or that you're 100% right and 100% certain. So you hear me saying that even with some of the conspiracy theories and misinformation that I addressed today, it's okay to talk about it in terms of, okay, this could be true. Like, it's nothing is impossible. Let's investigate and let's find out. Let's find out and see if we can place this better on the scale of 0% to 100%. Let's see where we can place it with a good, reasonable degree of certainty. Now, a lot of people believe in conspiracy theories because they fall into this possible/plausible range. I discussed this concept briefly in depth last time, but anything is possible, right? But what makes something plausible and more appealing to folks is when there are underlying facts that are tied together with a story. So when you have underlying facts tied together with a story, we call that plausible. Now, that story might not be ultimately true, might not make any sense, but when something has a story to it, it becomes more believable, okay? I'll just leave that there for you to digest and wrestle with. If you really like this concept, I really do suggest reading Thinking in Bets with by Annie Duke. Okay. All right. Let's go to understanding distrust. Okay. So I put some entities, icons of entities here that are commonly like the boogeymen of conspiracy theories. The most general and vague is this they, like this omnipresent they that's very powerful and controlling things. Not really sure who the they is. And often people, conspiracy theories will refer to a they or them. Okay. Then other common boogeymen are the government or corporations or the media, really, large kind of amorphous entities. There are other ones as well that tend to be the subject of conspiracy theories. Some a little less often, like science and academia, or the churches in general can be the targets, but it's more common to have the general they, government, corporations, and media. Those are the most common boogeymen. So it's valid for people to have distrust of these entities, right? It is totally valid because bad actors within each group exist, and cover-ups and bad acts have happened. What's common with conspiracy theories is that the blame usually gets cast on like the whole concept of the big organizations themselves, like the corporations as a whole, or the government as a whole, or the media as a whole. So when you think about actual examples of cover-ups and bad acts that have happened within each one of these types of organizations, you can certainly think of them. Okay, for government, things like like movies about like the Pentagon Papers. For corporations, examples of WorldCom and Enron. Big cover-ups. Presidential administration scandals, such as, when Bill Clinton was impeached and lied about, about his affair, or the Iran-Contra scandal, misinformation about the Vietnam War or the Iraq War. Like you can think of all these examples. With the media, you can think about the fact that ownership is concentrated in various groups. You can think about the fact that like Sinclair Broadcasting is a large organization that bought a number of local news stations across the country and pushed certain messages across the country, right? So these are individual instances of things that really, really, really have happened, okay? And each one of these, there are actors within each one of these groups that do have incentives to cover stuff up, right? And same thing with churches as well, like with the Catholic Church, sexual abuse scandals throughout the church as a whole, through various dioceses around the country and the world. And I could go on and on. So there is valid reason for distrust. So, but let's think about how these acts of deception get uncovered and the nature of them, okay? So usually when we find out that these things have happened, we find out about it from either other like whistleblowers in those organizations themselves, or we find out about it through like journalistic reporting. Sometimes it takes a while to find these things out. Like when a government organization or a company is hiding things actively, then it takes a lot of work to find it out, and it often takes a lot of time to find it out. But it can be found out. And the smaller and more designed for secrecy component of an organization is, the easier it is to keep things secret for a long time. For example, like a diocese of a Catholic church, it's controlled by a few individuals, or a department of the federal or U.S. federal government, like the CIA, right? It's like kind of designed for secrecy, or the Department of Defense, things like that, right? Or one company, or a group of 5 large pharmaceutical companies. The less dispersed the power structure there, and the more like closed in the organization, the easier it is for bad acts to be covered up by those organizations. But the larger and more dispersed the power structures are, the less likely that the whole thing is going to coordinate to not only do a bad act, but also keep it secret. Okay, so when you think about so a claim like the government is taking away our freedom because of coronavirus. Let's break that down a little bit. All right, so what government are we talking about? Are we talking about like all world governments? So like the chances that all world governments are coordinating and keeping something a secret, quite low. I mean, even if you try to think about like 2 different branches of our own federal government trying to coordinate together to do a thing together, it's kind of hard, right? The House and the Senate, or the executive branch and the legislative branch, et cetera, hard for them to coordinate things. In our own United States government is a lot of disparate sources. So if you're saying, the government is trying to take away our freedom, do you mean like the federal government that's run by the Trump administration, because they have one position, and then you have certain state governments with governorships and in state and local authorities that have different positions, and those are in conflict with each other. So they're not the whole government, whether it's the state or the country, the federal or international. It's hard to say with a straight face that all of them are coordinating and all of them are keeping a secret from you, right? Same thing with the media. The media is not one thing. The media is many, many, many disparate sources and power structures of information. And when you have the media and academia and science are fields where there are inherent incentives for others in the community to call out the bad acts and the secrets of the others, right? So if you have one newspaper that messes something up, and they get something totally wrong, how do we find out about that? We find out about it because all the other news outlets are fact checking it, are doing their own re-reporting of it, and they're incentivized to not only say, hi, you're wrong, but then to write it and publish it immediately, right? Same thing with science and academia. If one person says, I found something totally new and different, there's lots of incentive for other scientists to say, oh, wow, really? Let's make sure. Because if you really have discovered something new and important and groundbreaking, you get prizes for that, right? And so people want prizes and recognition and things like that in science and academia. But if somebody comes out with something that's way out there and totally unexpected, and everybody tries to go replicate that experiment and says, no, that actually wasn't the case, then then other scientists and institutions have incentive to do that as well. Okay, so these science and academia and the media in particular have good incentives to cross-check each other, and they have like disparate power sources. There's not one the media. I know everyone likes to say, all the media is owned by these 5 or 6 corporations. There are so many independent journalists and independent local organizations that, despite media consolidation, there are some large media companies, but the power structures are very, very dispersed, and many journalists have a voice. All right, so let me move on to the red flags. Oh, sorry, one more thing. Understanding appeal. So there are emotional rewards of believing conspiracy theories, and some people are more prone to these than others. So it's important to keep that in mind. The feeling of knowing something others don't, like the feeling being special, the feeling of being right, that feels good to us just naturally. The feeling of being individualistic and going against the grain. I mean, this is a really American ideal. And this in particular is appealing to people who like to think of themselves as free thinkers, as entrepreneurs, as people who can, do it yourself and you pull yourself up by your bootstraps. And again, this is a very common thing that that is helpful in a lot of circumstances. So when it comes to self-development and self-improvement and becoming successful, achieving like financial and financial health, financial wealth, personal happiness, fitness, all these things, doing it, it's often a good thing to be doing things that other people are not doing, right? Like if everybody or most people work a 9-to-5 job and don't become wealthy, and you think of yourself as somebody who wants to do something different and have something beyond that in terms of finances, then you'll think about doing things that ordinary people don't do as a as something that's worth celebrating. Okay, and that's a like a positive personal attribute. So that feeling can translate over to the domain of knowledge. Like, okay, everybody's doing this thing and I want a different result, so I'm going to go do that thing when it comes to financial success. Okay, totally makes sense. Everybody has these bad health outcomes by doing these things, like eating bad food and not exercising, and I want to have a different health outcome, so I'm going to do my own something different, which is working out and being very fit. That totally makes sense. But in the domain of knowledge, like everybody knows this thing to be true, and I'm going to know this different thing that they don't think is true. Okay, that doesn't translate over. Okay, and we'll go over that in more detail later. But you can see the appeal of that, right? You can see how those thoughts are related. Also, the feeling of certainty, of like being individualistic and going against the grain. Of feeling of certainty and order in a simple good and evil binary. Researchers have on conspiracy theories will often cite the fact that it's when things are really complicated, it's confusing, it's unsettling. Like this current situation right now, like people call it uncertain times. Uncertainty is hard. We like to know that things can be solved, that things can be fixed. And if it was as simple as good and evil, like there was like one big bad guy or one big they that's controlling all of it, if we could just beat them, then this problem would be solved. Okay, that's simpler than thinking about what experts say needs to be done to combat coronavirus, which is a lot of really hard things over a long period of time. Okay, so it's important to understand why people are attracted to information that that you identify quickly and easily as being incorrect. Because if you don't understand that appeal, then it's really hard to be understanding, it's really hard to be kind, it's really hard to be effective when you can't be understanding or kind. Okay. All right, let's go for the red flags. You guys have seen a lot of these, so I won't dwell on a ton of them, but these are quotes that I've pulled out. Like each one of these I have pulled from an actual post or an actual conspiracy theory article. So explicitly stating that it's telling the truth, that it is good, or everyone else is lying to you. Okay, that we know the truth and what the media is hiding from you, what the government is hiding from you. My favorite one is this is more in the realm of Facebook messages, but one started with, "This is a good article." Most journalists don't write like that. The facts of what you're presenting should speak for themselves without you having to state it explicitly. But that's a common trope, because this appeal, like what's appealing about this, about we know the truth, and what the media, government, companies are hiding from you. Well, we know the truth implies that you're special. Like I'm sharing this special information with you. It's really unlikely that somebody is, altruistically, like a website on the internet or a user on Twitter is altruistically for sharing some super secret information with you that everyone else is somehow blind to. More likely, the incentives of that individual user are to gain followers, gain notoriety, gain exposure, because it's easier to do that when you don't have a following with something that's outlandish. And then what the media, government, companies are hiding from you, again, feeling like you know something that others don't, feeling special. Moving on to red flag number 2, contains short conclusory opinion statements and wild conclusions. Now, I highlighted opinion statements because these are statements that are neither like demonstrably true or false. They're like very general, and they're short and conclusory. Like, it's all hogwash. All of what? Or the media has it all wrong. Absolutes, like all or never, those themselves can be red flags, because going back to the probabilistic thinking scale, the chances that something is all one thing, all right or all wrong, pretty low in either case, right? Wild conclusions. We'll touch on this a little bit more later, but the common trope is that X provable underlying fact means that Y wild conclusion is true. Okay, so keep an eye out in these kinds of articles for wild conclusions. When you can spot something that is laid out as a wild conclusion, then that should raise a red flag for you, your students, people that you're trying to educate about this stuff. Okay. All right. It's organized as a red flag number 3 is it is organized as a list of questions or hypotheses. I love this one. Okay. So why wasn't this blank in the actual article itself? Or it doesn't really add up that blank. So inviting a question without actually providing an answer. Or it's really unlikely that X happened because. So instead of providing the answer, which is what most news articles about, if you think about the structure of a news article, it says, this is the thing that happened. Here's another thing that happened. On this date it happened. Here's a document that said it happened. Here's what a person said about it. Here's, here is a consequence of it, right? Those are the kind of things that are in a news article. Not so much, lists of questions. Now, this is also a tricky one, because in analysis and opinion articles, which are fairly common even in mainstream reputable sites, sometimes journalists, good journalists from reputable sources will include a lot of questions, and that makes this very confusing. Okay, I'll give one example. People like to compare the cable talk news shows and accuse one side or the other of conspiracy theories. There's lots and lots of examples of like Sean Hannity, Tucker Carlson, Laura Ingraham on Fox News, but let me pick on Rachel Maddow for once. One of the least credible segments that I ever saw, typically, Rachel Maddow's reporting is, long list of facts and court documents and, well-supported hypotheses and conclusions, and lots of reporting, like original reporting. About a year ago, or maybe more, she had Michael Avenatti, a lawyer accusing Trump, Brett Kavanaugh, representing a client, accusing him of, among other things, rape of his client, right? So on the show, she read a list of questions that Michael Avenatti had proposed as deposition questions for Brett Kavanaugh, right? And they were questions about were you at this party? Did you rape this person? Did you participate in this act? That was, these are pretty graphically described events, right? And it was just a list of question after question after question after question. And the questions themselves invited the supposition that the answer to it was yes, okay? And that, so, you know, I'm picking on one example that's typically not how Rachel Maddow reports, but that right there is really damaging to credibility, because when we see lists of questions in other circumstances, that's not what journalism is. Journalism is the answers, okay? The answers to those questions would have been super important, because if you went down all these questions and the answer was provably no, then that's a totally different show than just the list of questions without any answers. So let's go to a Facebook thing that's floating around right now. You might have seen this. So I took a screenshot. This was, well, again, one of my recent favorites. So it's just a post of a bunch of questions about coronavirus, right? I don't care if you're a Republican, Democrat, Libertarian, or vote for unicorns. If you're not asking these questions, you should be. These are important questions folks need to be asking themselves, okay? So I'm gonna pick on a couple. One. Number 4, why should you stay inside but yet heat and sunlight kill the virus? Let's see. Number 9, why have coroners questioned death certificates listed as CV-19? Number 15, why do the homeless consistently demonstrate the lowest infection rates? I like this one at the bottom too. 17, why is the CDC saying kids need to be masked when they return to school or attend church, when they know that masks, hold on, my thing is in the way. I think it says prevent oxygen or something like that. So the problem with lists of questions is that the question itself is not the important thing. It's the answer to the question. But when you have a list of questions, especially these kinds, if they're based themselves on false or misleading assumptions, I should say assumptions there, then that's a problematic, because the questions themselves imply an answer, okay? So this one, why should you stay inside but yet heat and sunlight kill the virus? All right, there's a lot of layers here. Like, no one said, like, don't go on your back porch and look at the sun. No one said, you know, that don't go outside means, like, don't go to crowded areas, like, if you don't need to, like, don't be close to people because of the transmissibility of the virus. It doesn't mean, like, hide yourself from the sun. Like, no one said that. No one has said don't sit in the sun, get some vitamin D or anything like that. And then heat and sunlight kill the virus. Okay, what do we mean by heat and sunlight kill the virus? On surfaces, maybe, but not inside your body, okay? This is a whole other topic. And like I said, what's important are the actual answers, not the questions. There was another one on this list that says, like, why did Obama give Wuhan like $336 million or something like that? And it was totally a thing that you could go on Snopes fact check and realize immediately, oh, that's just not a true premise at all, okay? So but people will defend this as, like, you know, just, you know, do your own research and ask your own questions. There's a couple problems with that. One is that these lists are really long and they require a ton of effort to refute. So this is one strategy of conspiracy theories, is like throwing so much at you that you just kind of give up, because it's like each one of these has an answer. There were 20 more questions on this list, right? But if somebody just reads this, most people, like even people who find some truth and validity in the premises of these questions, themselves are not going to research the answers to them, okay? They're just gonna say, huh, yeah, why isn't it? I wonder. That moves on to red flag number 4, which is that it's prospectively defended as worth considering, even if it seems absurd. Think for yourself. Do your own research. You should be asking these questions. The do your own research thing is tricky because since it's a list of such a long list of questions, and in articles such a long list of citations that you have to chase down, it's a lot of effort to actually do research themselves yourself. And the think for yourself and ask the questions supposes that people are not actually doing the research. It supposes that people just sit there and think about it. So if you just sit sit and think about, why are they trying to divide us? I don't know. Sure is suspicious, though. That's not an answer. That's not helpful at all. So if it's a list, but the list of questions is invited. It invites people to do that, to make them think like they're critically thinking, but just critically thinking by itself doesn't actually give you the answers. Looking for the answers gives you the answers. So like this as a defense by itself is not sufficient. We do want to engage in critical thinking, but critical thinking and fact finding, those all go hand in hand. Okay, and it's a lot of work. All right. So the red flag number 5 is that it puts a burden on you to answer these questions. Like, if you can't really answer these questions, or do you really know what happened? And the logical fallacy here is that if you don't know the answer, then the presented hypothesis must be true. And that's a fallacy. Just because a hypothesis is presented doesn't mean that it's true. So a journalist or an article doesn't put the burden on you to answer the questions. It answers the questions for you. Okay, this is similar. This is similar. It says, oops, sorry. Oh, where'd my chat box go? Okay, I'm just not gonna look. Hold on, I hid my chat box and now I need to find it again just to make sure I'm not missing anything. Sorry. There it is. Okay. Okay. Red flag number 6, it asks you to prove a negative, which is often impossible. Like, no one has proven that the government wasn't involved, and they say it was X, but how do you know it wasn't Y? And again, asking you to not only answer the question, but to prove a thing that is negative, that would require you to prospectively prove everything else is true. Okay, so we're going to dive into Bill Gates and the coronavirus, the coronavirus itself, and the conspiracy floating around is that like Bill Gates created the coronavirus to like make a bunch of people sick and then like make money off the off of the virus and to actually kill people. So if you're being asked to prove that he's not doing that, it would require, like, to definitively prove that he's not doing that, it would require you to prove all other possibilities. Okay, and that's just not the burden of proof. The burden of proof is between the thing that's more likely to be true and the thing that's less likely to be true. And there, in this case, there are things that are very, very unlikely to be true, and there are things that are much, much more likely to be true. Okay, so don't, if somebody's presenting you with the lower probability thing, they have the burden of proof, not you. Okay. Red flag 7. It suggests an insidious plot by someone, like the media, elites, corporations, and government, but it doesn't say exactly what the plot is or provide any evidence for it. Okay. Things like no one knows how deep this all goes, or there's no telling who's behind all of this. I've got a lot to cover, so I'm just gonna move on and let that speak for itself. But here's a one that is really common these days. Okay, elevating the credibility of one credentialed expert who goes against the consensus of their entire credentialed expert peer group, like one doctor versus pretty much all the other doctors, or one scientist against pretty much all the other scientists. Now, there are professions in our society that are elevated, like doctor, lawyer, scientists, things like that. And especially when people if people have respect for those professions when like when they're in them or when they're not in them. But when you're in them, like if you are a doctor or if you're a lawyer or you're a scientist, you realize that you're just a human as well, and all of then you are fallible, and all of your colleagues are fallible, and everyone's just doing the best they can most of the time, right? And you also know that there are some people who are better doctors and worse doctors, better lawyers and worse lawyers, better scientists and worse scientists, right? Things like that, because everyone's a human. And if you are not in those positions, it's a little bit harder to see that. And if you don't know anyone who's in those positions, then it's really easy to attribute, it's really easy to attribute credibility to folks in those positions without examining the dynamics within that group, right? So people people will put a lot of stock in saying, well, this guy put out a video, says, I'm a doctor, and I say this is true, okay? And because they're a doctor, a person will, even if they're not a doctor in the particular field that they're addressing or things like that, people will give them credence and credibility, okay? But because they don't necessarily understand the dynamics within the community, within that peer group, they might over attribute credibility to one particular doctor's opinion, especially if it goes against the consensus of the group. So like there's a video with 2 ER doctors that went viral a couple weeks ago saying that like the coronavirus death rate is actually really, really low. These lockdowns are out of control, or they're out of proportion. And then their peer group immediately condemned some like factual errors and extrapolations and things like that were in their video. So like the whole organizations of like emergency medicine physicians wrote a letter, you know, denouncing what they had said, things like that. Same thing with the pandemic video. Scientists in there just had come out with a paper that was later retracted and discredited by her peer group, and so there's this imbalance between the credibility of one person going against the grain versus the entire peer group. And there's a couple things at play, right? So the going against the grain thing, people like, you know, remember we talked about that before. So they'll import that going against the grain is good thing into this situation. They'll also import this big group want to shut this one person up as justification. And that leads me to red flag number 9. Claims that being taken down for promoting misinformation is censorship, which therefore somehow proves that the thing taken down is actually true. Okay, so let's talk about censorship. People will often post this like prospectively. They're like, they're probably going to take this video down, but see it before they do. They, again, who's they? In the case of videos on YouTube or Facebook or Twitter, they are Facebook and YouTube and Twitter. And the incentives for platforms to keep content on there that is engaging, it's very, very high. They really, really don't like to take down content for a lot of reasons. One, they don't want to be accused of discrimination or censorship or things like that. And also, engaging content is their business. The more engaging content is, the more money they can make because the more eyeballs they have on the screens and the more ads they sell, right? Those are the financial incentives. That's why it's been really hard to get the platforms to take down things that are questionable information, right? So it's got to be pretty bad, bad misinformation to be taken down by the platforms, right? But people will justify the truthfulness of something by arguing that, you know, just because everyone believes it doesn't mean it's true, and that is true, okay? But the same thing is true in the other direction. Going in the other direction, like if everyone, so going in the same direction as most everyone else doesn't make something true or untrue. But going in the opposite direction of everyone else also doesn't make it true or untrue. What makes it true or untrue are the underlying facts. Okay. All right, so red flag number 10, the most sophisticated kinds of conspiracy theories. We're going to dive into one right here. All right, it has linked citations, facts, quotes, and evidence that appear likely to have been taken out of context or misrepresented. So it lists plenty of specifics and pairs them with wild conclusions. That has evidence, so like these citations, facts, and quotes. When they're investigated, they don't actually support the conclusions. And there's actually no direct and credible evidence provided. And these types of articles usually have some of the other red flags, but not all. So let's look at an example. All right. Bill Gates plans to kill you is one. All right. So let's go into an example, and I'm gonna share something else. I'm gonna share my browser window here. Okay, so I Googled, just went and Googled, hold on, here's my internet. Yeah, somebody asked me in response to the conspiracy theory graphic that I posted. So Bill Gates didn't patent the coronavirus? Yeah, that was a loaded question. All right, so let's look into it, right? How would we go and figure out the nature of this conspiracy theory and what it all means, understand why it's compelling, okay? It's really important to understand why this is compelling. So if you're addressing conspiracy theory in your class, I really recommend doing this type of exercise, like going down the rabbit hole of the whole thing and then identifying all the red flags throughout it. So hopefully you can see my screen here. Just make sure to chat. Okay. So USA, so one of the articles that came up, USA Today, I consider a reputable source. It's ranked pretty high on the media bias chart. So the claim is that research groups funded by Bill Gates engineered and patented the novel coronavirus vaccine and will profit from any future vaccine. So there's a lot of information in here and lots of links, which we want to go and follow. So there are multiple posts on Facebook, Claimer Research Institute. All right, let's look at this post on Facebook. Okay, what did this post on Facebook say? Can you all see this like screenshot of Facebook? Okay, so it says, is a coronavirus man-made? As you can see, it was taken down by Facebook or flagged as false information, right? Close your eyes. Imagine a world where disease-carrying pathogens are considered inventions. Now open your eyes. You live in that world, right? Red flags. Got some red flags there. All right, so let's go back. Okay, and let's go down the rabbit hole of the rest of this stuff. This echoes an article. All right, so what's this article that people are reading? So there's a website called humansarefree.com. We have not rated this site on the media bias chart. If we do, I imagine it'll be at the bottom, okay? So Bill Gates funded the Pirbright Institute, which owns a patent on coronavirus. The CDC owns a strain isolated from humans. Okay, so there are a bunch of things that are cited in here that look compelling at first, right? So if you just go down here, a patent. Ooh, a patent. That looks very true. Okay, so let's investigate. So we've got links and citations to things, but we've also got wild conclusions. The wild conclusion here is highlighted. Weaponized viral strain designed to sell more useless, deadly vaccines while at the same time killing off a few thousand or perhaps a few million people. That's a pretty wild conclusion there. And that Bill Gates wants to kill you to control the population. Okay, so these are like the wild conclusions in here. But we want to go in and see what about this is compelling. Well, these patents are compelling, right? The fact that they link to TEDx talks that he made, the fact that they link to certain quotes in here. So you know, if it takes some effort to dive down these rabbit holes, but it's worth doing. So let's take a look at this patent. Okay. Here's another thing about these conspiracy theories, though, is that if they source something, they might source something really complicated. It's really complicated for people to read a patent. Okay, not for me. I'm a patent attorney, so I was like, oh, I'm gonna totally read about this. This is my area of expertise. And you can see how to a layperson they would be like, oh, somebody does own a patent for coronavirus. It's right there. Now, this is where you want to be humble, because a lot of you might have dismissed this as like, Bill Gates doesn't have a patent for coronavirus. Can you even patent a virus? I don't think so. Meh. And not bother to look into it. But you should look into it, okay? And to the extent you can, read into it and Google the things that you don't know. Often just a little bit of Googling will get you to the facts that you need. So this abstract says the present invention provides a live attenuated coronavirus comprising a variant replication gene. Okay, these are a bunch of words. You know, we don't necessarily know what all these words mean, but like, what's an attenuated virus? That's, you know, that's just an example of a thing that you could look up and say, look up the definition of. This is something I'd recommend doing with your students. So What is an my internet's been a little slow. Attenuated virus. Okay, lots of people have Googled this. My internet is being slow, but basically it's a virus that has been altered to be weakened so that it either causes no no illness or a milder version that is used in vaccines. So this is something for a vaccine. Like if you dive down into all the details, you find that all the things that are in this fact check article, which USA Today lays out for you, are validated in this patent. Like, sorry, this is being slow. I will stay on for extra questions. I know I'm cutting into question time right now, but so the Institute has granted a patent which covers the development of an attenuated, weakened form of the coronavirus that could potentially be used as a vaccine to prevent respiratory diseases in birds, including IBV, and in other animals. You can look into other things like who is the Pirbright Institute, right? So you can Google that. Here's a Pirbright Institute, right? You can read all about them. There's a quote in this Humans Are Free article that says, Bill Gates says that we want to have vaccines for population control. So if you go and Google Bill Gates quotes on population control, one of the first things that comes up is the Snopes article talking about what these conspiracy theories articles mean, where they're getting that from, right? So there are underlying facts. It's really important to be able to speak intelligently to them and not be so certain to like write the whole thing off, because then you have trouble convincing people, okay? I'm going to go back to our I'm going to go back to this slide because what our ultimate goal is to combat misinformation and disinformation, right? So how can we effectively do that? Let me reshare my my slides here. Okay. So how do we make a difference? I'm going to go over how to do it real briefly in a couple of settings. One, in education. Two, with your family and friends, like in person, or over Zoom these days, and on social media. So overall principles: be kind and be effective. Those things like really, really go hand in hand. It's really hard to be effective if you're mean. Okay. All right. In general, don't be dismissive. Remember why this information is appealing, okay? All those are valid reasons. And the underlying facts are, there often are underlying facts. So if you dismiss them, like especially in the vaccine debate, right? If you just completely dismiss somebody who has any kind of concerns or qualms about vaccines, then you'll tend to lose them. Why? Because there are underlying facts that are valid that support parts of positions, right? Vaccines can have side effects, like including death, right? It's not all a black and white thing. Like vaccines are 100% good all the time, because if you ignore somebody's like real experience, that like they know somebody who had a bad reaction, or they know somebody who died, or like they like know like details about about side effect rates that are valid, if you just dismiss that completely, then you can't have a broader conversation about the pros and cons of like vaccine for measles, like one of the most deadly contagious diseases that was like a scourge on the world that killed hundreds of millions of people, versus like the risks of present day vaccines. You can't have that conversation if you're completely dismissive of underlying facts, okay? Two, be humble, because you could be wrong, right? Like you might not have thought that there was a patent on a coronavirus, but lo and behold, there is. Could you be wrong about the other things? Yes. Could Bill Gates be really trying to kill us all? Possible. Highly, highly unlikely given what we've looked at, but like be humble. Get specific, and when you're talking to folks, ask exactly who is doing something. Don't let people get away with they, and ask what they are doing, okay? Don't let them be vague. Like Bill Gates is trying to kill you is actually a nice specific example that you can go and debunk, right? The government is trying to take away your freedom. is a little bit more vague, or like they are trying to control your mind is even more vague, right? So get down to who and what. Avoid pejorative terms when addressing individuals, like conspiracy theory and anti-vaxxer. Now you'll notice that my post said conspiracy theory because I wasn't addressing any individuals. Okay, it's a common term, it's common language. But if you call somebody a conspiracy theorist or accuse them of believing conspiracy theories, you've pretty much already lost them. Okay, if you call somebody an anti-vaxxer, if you call somebody a climate denier, you call somebody something that's pejorative, you're going to lose them, because it's really hard to point at somebody and say you're a wrong idiot and have them agree with you, right? It's very hard. In an educational setting, what I recommend, this is in educational settings when folks are tend to be a little bit younger and more impressionable, you're trying to alert them to these things before they encounter them in the real world and before they like join a conspiracy theory cult, right? So you want to focus on spotting rhetorical patterns. The patterns themselves are important because it's like a meta awareness. You're not just reading the words, you're reading what are the words doing. So doing that goes to the second point. Do close rhetorical analysis. I'm an English major, so I just love this. So shout out to all my AP Lang language and composition teachers and my AP Lit. Love you guys. Like reading stuff super closely and saying, what does this picture do? What is it? What is it trying to evoke? What does this sentence do? What is it there for? What is the point of view of the author? That stuff, mwah, that's the best stuff, okay? So do that with these conspiracy theory articles. And don't be afraid to deconstruct an example directly. It's a lot more effective than dismissing it. Like go through the whole thing and Google stuff together with your students, right? Learn together. In person with family and friends, I suggest again, get specific, ask who did a thing, what they did, and where they got their information. Especially if it's a relative, listen and be kind, because you can't get anywhere if you don't start with that. Don't call them wrong. Don't call them an idiot, even if you're thinking that yourself, because you're not going to be effective. I suggest, usually like when you're talking to somebody who's like presenting you a conspiracy theory, you're starting with two totally different bases of information. Like they've seen articles that you've not seen, you've seen articles they've not seen. So if you really want to engage, I would sit down at a computer and do this too. Like show them how you do the research, show them how you verify the information. Problem with this is that it's time consuming, okay? So if you don't have time, it suggests for your sanity you don't engage, okay? But if you don't engage and you don't have time, then don't complain about the fact that you're, somebody is going around, somebody that you love in your life is going around believing these things, if you don't at least, try once in an effective manner, okay? On social media, I really encourage you to maximize your effectiveness, okay? I know this subject drives people nuts, and I don't want you to go nuts. I want you to be effective, and I want you to cut your losses, okay? So if you sit down with your let's go back to your family and friends. If you invite somebody to sit down with you and go through the research process with you and they refuse, don't waste your time, okay? If you show them facts that are really hard to refute and they still refuse to believe them, again, don't waste your time. Like some people you can't convince, okay? There are people you can convince, and there are people you can't, and you want to be able to tell the difference, okay? But on social media, avoid personally attacking people, okay? Especially personally attacking people on their page and their post. Like if they posted something, you got to tread really carefully on their post. And my two best tips for social media is, one, limit the time that you spend in a Facebook thread response, okay? One, because you can spend a lot of time arguing one specific thing and very few people are going to see it. Usually you're going to be engaged with somebody who is like already dug in, right? And they're already opposite of you. So it's like already one of the hardest people to affect. And very few people are going to see this thing that you wrote that you put a lot of effort into, okay? Low return on time, low effectiveness. If you do want to engage, like if you see a bunch of your friends sharing stuff that's inaccurate, what I suggest is use your own platform. You have your own page, you have your own Twitter, your own Facebook, your own LinkedIn, your own whatever. Sharing your own content is the most effective use of your time, because then it's a one-to-many. Like all of your friends, your peer group can see that, and so they know what you think, even if they didn't look at that particular thread of fight that you had with your friend. Okay. If you share some, I know it's hard to create your own content, write out your own ideas all the time. And it's a lot easier to just share another article, especially a reputable article. And I do encourage you to do that. But if you share something, know that most people are not going to click on it. Summarize the thing that you find compelling about it. Write your own little blurb. The more that you can put your ideas out there positively, the more effective you're going to be. Like saying that thing is wrong, that thing is wrong, that thing is wrong, really low effectiveness rate, and a poor use of your time. Saying these are the things that I believe, and here are why, and here's my reasoning, and here's my logic, as a positive, from a positive point of view, from your own platform, one-to-many is a lot more effective. Okay, so if you're going to engage, that's what I suggest, and it'll drive you less nuts. Okay, so that's what I've got today. I'll take. I took the whole hour, but I will stay on another 15 minutes for questions. So if you got to go, I'm sorry. This will be on the recording. So I'm going to. You guys can go ahead and unmute yourselves, because I believe you can do that. Okay. All right.
Hi, Vanessa. My name is Ben.
Hey, Ben.
Hi, I'm an academic librarian and information literacy instructor.
Awesome.
I've been a fan of yours, a professional fan for a few years, and I'm continually impressed with what you do. But I just like to know, in terms of the burden of proof being on the researcher nowadays, where we have to critically think ourselves, what would you, in your opinion, what would you want libraries to do to make that easier for the community?
Make it easier for
people to come up with, where they don't have to do so much research. I mean, I'm thinking, dreaming here, but if you, what would you think?
Yeah, so one of the challenges of this, of information literacy in general, is making complex information appealing and available to a lot of people. Okay. Again, preaching to the choir here, you all love these deep dives. You guys love research. I imagine there are lots of librarians on this call. There are teachers, people with PhDs, and folks who just like really love deep learning, deep knowledge. Okay, that's not most people. And the problem exists when you've got a lot of people that are that just like consume information uncritically, right? And make poor decisions based on the consuming of the uncritical information. And one of the hard things is that the misinformation, like the memes, the things that are easily deconstructed and illogical, they're easily shareable. Okay, so this was a challenge when this tip I'm going to share with you is like the whole thing behind the media bias chart. It has to be accessible. It has to be shareable. Okay, you have to be able to cut out some of the nuance and strike the balance between complex and nuance and general. Okay, so the media bias chart itself, it is a very popular and got shared very widely because you could just share it. It was just a picture, right? Now, it was really important to me because I love, research and stuff, that it withstand the scrutiny of people who also, like me, like to read. Okay? But there were like millions of people saw that first media bias chart. And then I wrote a blog post about the reasoning and the methodology behind it. And, I think 400 or 500 people read it and commented. And I was like blown away because it was long. It was like 2,000 words. I've had blog posts that are 7,000 words, and it's always like amazing to me, like, wow, people read that whole thing, and most people don't like to read. But the 500 people who read that compared to the millions of people who've seen the media bias chart, it's just night and day, right? So to the extent you can figure out how to make these little pieces of information accessible in meme form. Like I hate memes and I love them. My blog is called All Generalizations Are False, because I hated bumper stickers and memes that are just like there were just generalizations and easily disproved. And so I thought it was really ironic that I made infographics, and those were the things that got the most popular. I'm like, this is insane, right? But same thing with this conspiracy theory graph. It's like six bubbles. You know, I know you librarians love infographics, right? Whatever you can infographic, do it. Okay, so if you want people to, instead of reading this USA Today fact check, if somebody makes a cool infographic debunking it, that's like actually logically sound instead of the stupid infographics that are like spreading the conspiracy theories, that's a way to combat it. It's like a one-to-one thing. Like, I post this meme that's totally false in conspiracy theory. Okay, I post the meme that's like got a lot more words on it because it's more sound. But to the extent you can do that, the more effective you're going to be. Thanks for your question. Any other questions?
Hello, this is Steve from Wisconsin.
Hey, Steve.
How are you?
Good. Thanks for being on.
I don't know if this is just more of a comment than anything, but what do we as Americans do when the greatest conspiracy person in the country is our own president?
So I'll just address this broadly, and I'll paraphrase that. So the president says things that are demonstrably false from time to time, somewhat frequently, and I lead with that, with phrasing it that way, because it's really important to be like, if you say that to somebody who likes the president or voted for the president, you're gonna lose them, right? Saying that he's a conspiracy theorist, right? Best to get specific on a thing that he says. So how you'll see how like newspapers handled his comments on possibly injecting disinfectant into the body or injecting sunlight into the body, right? They addressed it by saying, here is what he may have been referring to, and here is why generally experts think that this is not a good idea, and we recommend that you don't do this, right? So addressing the individual facts themselves. It's much the more general you say, like, he's a liar, he tells all these lies, he's a conspiracy theorist, the harder it is going to be to like win people over to your side. The more specific you can be, and like the more dispassionate you can be about like the injecting bleach, like pros and cons of that, like as a as an actual strategy. I know it's hard because really it's appealing to like laugh with your friends at like a funny video on Twitter. Like, there's some really funny videos about this, right? But those things are not going to be convincing to people who disagree with you politically, who are already inclined to like the president. It's going to make them resent you and be less likely to listen to you in the first place. But I think this goes to a related problem, which is that the inability to distinguish news from opinion and misleading information is not limited to the public. A lot of our elected officials are bad at discerning good information and bad information as well. And this is especially problematic when you have like our cable news environment has politicians come on it. So like the news and the politicians are one in the same in many instances, like on these talk shows. And when it's not the politicians are not only listening to their own media and buying into their own side's media and what they say, they're participating in the media itself. Okay, so I think this is a generation, like a generational thing where like we've got a lot of people that are in power right now are older and have grown up in the age of news where like when they were younger, it was just, a few news sources like major news networks and the major newspapers. And then they've gone through this massive shift in the news landscape. So that group is just as prone as any other group in society to not be able to tell the difference between good news information and bad news information. So I'm saying is that our elected officials get sucked into conspiracy theories just as badly as the rest of the public. And that's the problem.
Thank you.
Vanessa?
Yes.
Hi, my name's Nikki.
Hi, Nikki.
It says Nicolette there. I already sent you this, but I'm Bethany's aunt.
Oh, hi.
Softball Bethany.
Yay.
What I need to know, maybe it's on something somewhere, but you said you have, what is your blog? You have a blog post, a blog that you post on frequently?
No, so this project started out as a blog called All Generalizations Are False. So I've moved all of the blog content onto advantesmedia.com. So the blog used to just be called All Generalizations Are False, which itself is a generalization. So some generalizations are true and useful, but yeah, nerd word stuff. Yeah, but my blogs, I email them out. So if you're on my email list, you'll see them. I post them on social media, and they are, you can search for them on our site too.
Okay, so that would be where I need to start, since I'm kind of at the beginning here.
Oh, perfect.
I'm involved with a group of, turns out to be just women right now. And we have a web thing, and one lady is setting up a website. It's just called The Truth Matters to Us. Only the us is .us, but we're just really trying to do exactly what you're talking about, and that is, how do we counteract all these friends and family on every kind of issue? So I really appreciate this. This was very helpful, and I will look at the advantesmedia.com and go from there. Thank you.
All right, sounds good. Yep, we'll have more of these. So
good.
All right, thanks, Nikki. All right, any other questions?
Vanessa?
Yes.
Hi, my name is Dan McInnes. I'm a professor at the University of Toledo.
Hi.
I teach in an honors program, and we have a visual literacy initiative also on the campus. So I have basically 200 freshmen a year, first years, that I can sort of expose to the media bias chart and give them some tools. Because I think a lot of them are very thirsty for tools on how to get through all this. What I'm noticing right now is that a lot of them are trusting nothing in terms of the media. They're allergic to anything that they think they could label political or has been labeled political. Like anything political is bad. And then the thing that I think is probably the most important, and this is my question, is everybody's getting their news differently. And when I show them the media bias chart, I say, look where AP is and look where Reuters is. And they're like, yeah, okay. Or look where ABC is. Like, yeah, that's what my grandfather watches, So when everybody's so balkanized in terms of how they get their information, what are some of the ways that I can teach my students that everybody's getting different constructs now? I mean, even with cable news, now they're shooting different ads at different people in different households.
Yes. It's like you're a plant almost, because, and show everybody your shirt.
Oh yeah, I got my t-shirt on. Yeah.
Heck yeah. That's a media literate AF for Advantes shirt that you can get at our site. So lead me to pitching something else. So that's exactly the problem, is that people are, they get their news from different sources. It's like, it's funneled to them like through like Facebook is a news conduit, right? Like it amplifies the things that you particularly see based on what it thinks we want to see. So your news consumption habits, especially for young people, I always ask whenever I speak at colleges and universities, is like, where do you get your news? And it's always from social media. And their habits are from, even if they go to individual websites on their own, like they type in the URLs, those are all formed by habits that were likely informed by social media in the first place, right? So they're going to see the same things over and over and over. And it's very segmented, siloed, filter bubbled, whatever you want to call it. And it gets to the point where it feels bad, like viscerally, for people to go and watch something that they disagree with. I've experienced this myself. I experienced this with my own analysts when I made them go and watch just hours of cable news from news that from the other side. I mean, they're like, oh, it's made me feel ill. So people say, oh yeah, I get my news from a lot of sources. People don't. They get them from like maybe 5, 10 at the most. Okay. And like when they say they see other perspectives, again, usually they don't. So how do we force that? You kind of have to force it. And so that's why I've taken the approach I have with our news literacy tool called CART. Okay, it's Content Analysis Rating Platform. It is a software program that our analysts use to rate news articles every single week and rate all the sources on the media bias chart. And what we do is every week we take a new news topic. And I personally select 6 articles from across the news landscape. I select a bunch of left ones, a bunch of right ones, some that are higher reliability, some are lower reliability. So not only do they get the exposure to a bunch of different news sources, but more importantly, they see how the same story is covered from different filter bubbles and different silos. That sharpens so many skills. It allows you to see why people have opposing views from you in the first place. It allows you to see the arguments that are compelling to them that are not compelling to you. And it allows you to see the holes in your own side's argument. So there's like no more valuable way of teaching that than like forcing people to do it. And 6 articles a week doesn't seem like a lot, but it is a lot. It's a lot to go through and read and compare and contrast. So I feel like that that's the most important way to teach news literacy, which is why we've taken that approach.
Thank you.
So thanks for being my plant so I could pitch that.
Absolutely.
Vanessa, could I ask you another question?
Yeah.
This is more for the participants. I saw there were about 80 participants at the beginning, and right now there's around 48.
Mm-hmm.
And I see maybe 12, 14 active cameras. I'm getting a feeling that a lot of the participants here today are educators. I am not, I'm a retired engineer, but just a show of hands, how many are in education or have been? Wow, that's great. I'm really happy to see that. Thank you.
Yeah, the people who are on Advanta's email list and follow us are like the best people. You guys, I just love this group. So, we got AP language teachers. Woo, AP Gov.
So I have a question.
Yes.
Thanks. My name is Maggie. This has been so great.
Hi, Maggie.
Hi. So this is like a personal question for me. I've been so frustrated seeing all of these things on Facebook. And a lot of what you've shared today really has guided me. Do you recommend like blocking posts? You know, you have that option of blocking posts like this, just so you just don't see it. Or, you know, I don't want to be in a bubble.
Mm-hmm.
So I hesitate to do that. And yet seeing all of this stuff, I just find it a little crazy making.
Yeah. I mean, it depends on your own personal tolerance. Like, you got to take care of yourself and your own mental health first. So if it makes you anxious and stressed and frustrated, such that it inhibits your ability to to contribute positively, then I do recommend that you block people or do whatever you have to do to keep yourself sane. Okay, because when you there's there's a concept I like to refer to as information fitness, right? So part of fitness is diet, and part of fitness is exercise. So when it comes to information fitness, part of information fitness is consuming good things, but the other part is like the exercise part, which is like doing good things, like doing things that you feel that make you feel good and make you feel like you make a difference, like civic engagement, voting, volunteering, talking to people in your community and convincing that, like, spreading good information to them, like all those things feel good. So like you want to be able to like whenever you find yourself getting really frustrated about like this sea of misinformation and you feel like you're just like trying to push it back with the broom, do whatever you need to do so that you can take part in that civic exercise, right? So if it's making you crazy to like be on Facebook at all because your friends are sharing like all like garbage nutso stuff, yeah, block those posts or like mute them. If you don't have to unfriend them, whatever you have a tolerance for. If you have a tolerance for engaging, if you if you find yourself being able to persuade some folks, if you like to share information on your own page that's that's good information, then go ahead and do that. But focus on the things that you feel good about and that you feel can make a difference, and don't feel obligated for the sake of like for not being in a bubble. If something's big enough, like you'll hear about it. Like I'm sure you heard about like the pandemic video, and when there's like a big piece of misinformation out there, you'll hear about it.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. All right.
Vanessa, good afternoon. I'm Hassani Sinclair. I teach government.
Hi, Hassani.
Yeah.
I got your email, so I think I know your question.
Good. Yeah. First of all, thank you so much for doing this.
Mm-hmm.
My question for everyone else, anecdotally, at least, it appears that conspiracy theories are peddled more by people at the extreme right end of the political spectrum than the extreme left end of the political spectrum. So I was wondering, I know someone else on the call was earlier, is there something inherent in conspiracy theories that makes them attractive to right-wing ideologies, or is there some element of conservative or right-wing ideology that gravitates towards theories with or advancing ideas with very little burden of proof?
So I wouldn't say that there's no association that I know of and that's like been studied, and I hesitate to offer any conclusions on that based on anecdotal observations. So I wouldn't necessarily say that it's the far right is prone to conspiracies. So what I will say is that there are a lot of so people that are very left or very right or completely apolitical are prone to conspiracy theories. Okay, so a lot of the worst ones that I see are people who don't consider themselves very political tend to gravitate towards like the conspiracy theories, especially the ones floating around right now that have to do with the coronavirus, tend to be less political, I think. Like the Bill Gates vaccine one, and the vaccine conspiracies have been really strongly associated with far left communities because, and it has to do often with the target boogeyman. Okay, if it's like okay, so Sandy Hook conspiracy theory, right? This is like a right-wing conspiracy theory because the Sandy Hook massacre put a lot of attention on gun violence on this country, right? Justifiably so, and the need for gun legislation. And as a result, the conspiracy theories that tend to discredit, like Sandy Hook even happened, it's really out there kind of stuff, tended to align with right-wing groups that were afraid that gun rights were going to be taken away because that's a right-wing issue. But for vaccines, the left-associated boogeyman is like big pharma and corporations, like these entities that have a capitalistic profit motive, right? Also, health and like being healthy and not putting chemicals into your body. These are things that tend to be more associated with left-wing folks. But things like the 5G is causing coronavirus, or you know, a number of like medically based conspiracy theories, a lot of them are really appealing to people who are completely apolitical. Most of the things that I shared with you, like the list of questions of the coronavirus conspiracy theories, I saw shared by two people who are pretty moderate politically. Okay, so I don't think it's something that you can slice. Like, you can certainly say there are a lot of these far-right conspiracy theories that are associated with far-right conspiracy theory groups, but that tends to be when it's aligned with a bigger issue. Like QAnon is right-wing aligned, because there's like the origin of the conspiracy theory was like, this is anti-Trump, it's a deep state. These are like all like right-wing kind of issues to hold on to. So you can associate some with the other. And are there more? I haven't done a study, one way or the other to say, and I don't know of any studies that say one way or the other. But I think it's easier to slice into, like, there's this segment of the population on the right and the left, like, above or below this line are prone to conspiracy theories, whatever that line is. And it's likely just like ability to spot patterns, ability to discern information quickly. That's, I think, most likely the dividing line.
Thank you.
So, now if I can ask the follow-up question on that, Vanessa, what about the First Amendment aspect of this thing? I had sent you a question that may not have been all that well worded, but here we have situations where we have false information that actually causes people, in the case of Pizzagate, for example, to go and shoot up a demonstrably false location, or Sandy Hook for that matter, with the things that Alex Jones is doing, and actually harming the people who are victims themselves of this crime. How do we mitigate and moderate some of these really damaging urban legends and conspiracy theories in order to protect people whose rights are being violated because of others who believe things which are completely out in left field? Yeah.
So I have a long answer to that, and which you can read once I publish it. So it's you preface this as like a First Amendment issue, and there's absolutely a lot of First Amendment implications. Freedom of speech is itself a complicated subject. And when it comes to the regulation of speech by the entities that are distributing the speech most these days, which are the social media platforms, there's a ton of issues there. So I, along with one of my advisors at Attenuated Media, who is a law professor at the University of Maryland, his name is Maxwell Stearns, we were writing a law review article about this topic. And in it, we propose, we go through, the First Amendment implications, we go through a lot of stuff, but short answer, like the punchline, is that we'd propose a system of ratings based on like third-party ratings organizations of the news, like Advantage Media, right? It's obviously a bit self-serving, but until we can systematically classify information along gradients that people accept, we have things like content ratings for news, for movies, like G, PG, rated R. They actually look at the content, say, how violent is this, and they put a letter on it, right? And we make decisions based on about if we are going to consume that before even seeing it, based on that designation, right? And we don't have any such ratings for news. Now, I'm not saying Advantage Media should be the only news ratings organization. I think there actually should be several news rating organizations, but we just make the argument that our system of news classification is a very helpful one, that ideally platforms could be compelled or voluntarily adopt in order to screen out, or at least provide filters and warnings. Twitter, to a certain degree, is starting to do that now, putting a label of harmful misinformation on tweets, and I think that's a really good step in the right direction. So I hope they continue to do this. So, all right, it's 1:30. I really appreciate you all being on here. It's great to talk to you, and I'll put this on the website. So thank you all for coming today. Have a great afternoon. Bye.
Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Vanessa.
Thanks.
Thank you.
It's so nice to have met you after all this time, in a sense. But
Yes. Nice to meet you too. All right. Thanks all.